should be on. In the meanwhile, maybe Irene, Eugene, you could introduce yourselves and share some opening remarks.
Sure. Why don't you go first, Irene?
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. Irene Fialka, I'm CEO of INiTS, the University Business Incubator here in Vienna, Austria. We've been operating the incubation program since 2002. Ever since had over 250 startups, all spin-offs, all tech startups in all different domains, because we serve all the universities here in Vienna. Since 2011, we see digital health solutions coming more and more. And in 2018, we launched another program for health startups specifically, which is Health Hub Vienna. And you see the two logos behind me, so to speak. And this program addresses an acceleration program, really addressing startups at a later stage who have solutions somewhere on a market already, who really want to expand internationally. And we offer a base in the middle of Europe, so to speak, to really, accelerate in the European market. And in return, also really innovate more and faster within the healthcare system in Europe.
Cool. So I'll go next, since we're waiting for Beny to hopefully rejoin us. I was looking forward to catching up with him as well. So my name is Eugene Borukovich. I'm a serial intra and entrepreneur, which means I go from my own companies, taking something from 0 to 1 and beyond, but also go back into a large organization to kind of challenge a bit how things are done. So my last role, I spent 3.5 years with a big pharma company where I headed up a global team in digital health, and we sort of built or worked with startups. And then as of January, I feel like a very free man, and joined my amazing wife in building Your Coach Health, which is a practice management solution and a marketplace for health coaches.
Great.
Hi, Beny. We do hear you.
How are you doing, guys?
Good, good. It's your turn, Beny, to introduce yourself.
It's my turn. Great. I'm Beny Rubinstein. I had a somehow similar path than Eugene. I spent about 15 years at Microsoft running some incubation groups for new cloud technologies. One of them part of Microsoft Research in the health solution space, where I met Dr. Kira Rubinstein. And I've also built some new ventures, and I'm currently advising several cloud and AI startups and funds.
So since Thomas is gone and Beny looks like he's gone too. There we go.
Beny's having some connectivity issues. I'll just move on with the questions, if I may. So the first question that we've prepared is, how do you know if and when it's time to transition from corporate to startups, and how do you prepare for that transition? Irene,
well, now you first, Eugene, huh?
it's still fresh. It's still fresh.
It's fresh. Yeah.
And this is probably a little bit more of a philosophical discussion, but certainly in even half an hour probably can't get through it. But realizing we do want to cover some things. So I don't think you ever kind of prepared. You just, to a certain extent, you know in your heart that you've done what you could. And I think for me, the biggest filter was learning. I mean, no matter what age a person is, the moment you stop learning is the moment that you get bored, and the moment you at least mentally start dying, right? And so, I think it's the combination of you're never ready for it. It just kind of hits you that it got to move on. And to be fair, and this is not unique to the previous company I was with, I think any giant corporate, there's bureaucracies and policies and, saying no first before, and it's absolutely freeing to be in a startup, while obviously we still got to pitch to VCs and we still got to pitch to the customers. And, it's not like you're in charge of your own destiny completely, but you're free to make decisions and move and just getting shit done. So the short version, you're never ready for it. It just kind of hits you. And for me, the biggest filter is the continuation of learning.
All right. I do perfectly agree, Eugene. I just would like to emphasize what you also said a little bit more. I think for me, it is entrepreneurs are not naysayers, they are doers. So getting shit done, getting things done is really the attitude of an entrepreneur, no matter whether it's an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur. And I think one dimension that I would like to add to what Eugene said was that that if you start to feel that you cannot get things done any longer, for whatever reason, because of the system, because of yourself, no matter, but if you have that feeling, I feel that an entrepreneur and everybody, not only entrepreneurs, they really should take a decision and, step aside, think of something else, do things, because this is what makes me feel happy. If I can get the things done that I want to move, then and if I'm happy with it, then I think I can also do things, then I can move things. You have to be absolutely passionate about what you do, then you're good, and then you can get things done, and this has to come together.
Can I add one more quick thing, since since Beny is not occupying the time, so we're trying to just kidding, Beny, if you can hear us.
Go ahead.
Well, we can't see or hear you. I was gonna say, I always kind of within my own team, or whenever I am hiring someone, the question always is like, what makes you get up in the morning before your alarm? And I think that's, to echo what Irene said, it's like the moment you start actually sleeping in and really like snoozing that button, that means you don't have enough energy or oomph or excitement to keep really moving, right? And I think that's...
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Beny, are you here in the background? Because I noticed your connection.
Can you see me?
We can't see you, but that's okay. I mean...
Maybe you pop
can
up
you hear me
again later, but we do hear you very well.
Okay, that's a good start. Yeah. So, I wanted to just elaborate on a couple of points that Eugene already stated. He and I think we didn't rehearse for this talk, but we had an offline conversation a few months ago. I think that everything in life, you never know when you're ready, but there are some certain signs, and I fully agree that the main thing for me is the pace of learning. And make no mistake, I think there's a lot of myths and realities about both corporations and startups. And I think that my own personal experience, Microsoft was my post MBA experience. I really learned how to build businesses from scratch, how to scale them globally. And of course, when you're using a brand that stands for itself, of course you bring a lot of value to the table, but you actually take a lot of benefits and enjoy a lot of the structure that's in place. So I felt like Microsoft helped me unleash a lot of my dreams and make them real. At some point, as some folks already said here, you end up at a position where you've learned a lot, you have a lot of energy, and you still need to go for a lot of hoops in large corporations. And that's the time I said I would like to fly solo, I'd like to go on my own, I'd like to create my own brands. And that comes with a price tag as well. So in my case, I had a great experience. I've launched a venture in Latin America. I've actually partnered with Microsoft, Qualcomm, and other great companies. But I did want to have, my own autonomy, and as much as I could, I reported to the board. But that said, after several years doing that, I did return to Microsoft. I returned to Microsoft to a new role, to a new incubation team. And then I once again left for another venture. So I think it's kind of a balance. I think there are limitations you hit no matter where you are. And if you think it's the right time to make the switch, then you should, as long as you keep learning and making your dreams come true.
Perfect. Thank you, Beny. Beny, would you like me to proceed with the questions, or would you like to be in charge?
Yeah, I can go ahead and ask the questions if you want. I think that's, as anyone here, we are all very deeply passionate about innovation, but not only just in the sense of a conceptual framework, but actually making things happen, right? And that's what made us do some shifts in our careers. I wanted to talk a little bit about, the challenges, and most importantly, how you overcome those challenges in a startup. Things, for example, such as designing a go-to-market strategy, and again, just all the hiccups that we kind of know what they are in startups. Can you share a few personal insights in terms of how you overcome the main pitfalls?
So maybe I'll kick it off. I think for me, you kind of said go-to-market strategy. So to me, you can have a hypothesis. I wouldn't call it, you don't need to flush out a strategy for a 5-year strategy like in a big corporate. I think it's a hypothesis that you go prove and disprove, right? And I think the pitfall in a lot of cases, I mean, there's a strong belief in something and not listening to the market as you're discovering, or de-risking that strategy or hypothesis that you put together, right? It's, I think you got to really be, as an entrepreneur, be self-reflective into what your potentially original goal, mission, business model, go-to-market strategy, but actually listening out there. I'll give you guys like literally just from right off the bat, Marina, my wife, started the company as a practice management solution. We started getting a pull and a demand from health services companies that want to actually part-time bring on health coaches. So all of a sudden we're kind of negotiating a number of contracts on that front. If we would have stuck and said, well, we're a practice management solution only, right, and not listened to that demand, and this just happened in the last 2 months, right? So that being dynamic, still not foregoing your mission vision is one of the keys. I mean, there's many pitfalls. I can keep going, but we only have half an hour.
Yeah.
Great. Do you want to add anything, Irene?
Yes. We have, we have seen so many different entrepreneurs, and I think the most important thing to really start with is what we discussed, or the why. What makes you get up in the morning? Why are you doing this? And I think that why has to fit with the strengths of what you can offer. And I think that really has to fit. There can be whys. Why do I want to change the world? Yet I don't have an innovative idea or maybe not the technological know-how to really solve it the way it should be solved. So I think these two parameters really need to be in place. And then you buy in everything else that you cannot do as good as others to really be fast. And that's very often a decision that comes hard. I think people sometimes are not very honest with themselves in terms of what are their real strengths and what are their real weaknesses. So the decision what to do yourself as a startup, as an entrepreneur, and what to buy in is a very important decision. And you have to be open to everything. And I perfectly agree with Eugene that the market demand is a very important thing. Yet on the other hand, we also had solutions where there was a real strong demand of a really small group of potential clients that, the freaks only, these lead users. What you also have to be aware of as a startup, that you don't get stuck in a one-way street of lead users. Those lead users must be followed by early adopters. They must grow into a majority at one point in time. And if you cannot make that, if it stays that small group also as a startup, you will never scale. And I think these are you have to have your ears on the ground and your eyes on the customer and your etc. to really listen to to match all three parameters. Yeah, you have to have the passion, you have to have the skills, and those skills need to give a solution that a growing group of customers feels well served with, and I think that's it. Yeah. And you can fall off many sides of the horse, I would say. Yeah.
You gotta hang on tight.
Yeah, hang on, keep going. Keep going. I think that also very important skill.
Great. So I wanted to switch gears. I mean, of course, I think we all, in a way, a little bit tired of talking about COVID-19. I've participated in several, live discussions. Some of them I learned a lot. Some of them I didn't quite agree with the perspectives. But I wanted to hear from you, in a more concrete manner. One of the things that I heard, different versions, is what has changed in the behavior of investors, and likewise for startups that are fundraising. What are the actual things they need to kind of change or adapt? I have my own views on that, but I would like to hear your points first before I share it.
Yeah.
As an investor, I'll go.
Well, I think there is many moves. And first, it depends on what stage of startups the investors invest in, and how much money they can invest. Because there are a lot of startups that really went into trouble, and at that point in time, both the founders as well as the investors really need to focus on how to solve that current situation at a very short notice. So a lot of startups, have investors that really backed them up again. Yeah, they did reinvest into the same startup, and that portfolio management of the investor is definitely a key driving force of whether or not they are able and are willing and have not only the money, not only the cash resources, but also the time resources to really invest into further startups. On the startup level, it really depended on whether the startup just had an investment, yeah, and they could just drive on, whether they were just preparing and how far they went with the investors' negotiations, whether they were hit or not. The most difficult situation definitely was of those startups that were just starting to raise money, and who didn't have to show anything yet, that on top of all the crises and all the other risks that the investors, of course, see, on top of all that, has the risk of being the least trustworthy, I would say, because being new on the market, being new in the investors' portfolio or pipeline, etc. And I think that was really the driving force of the startups. Plus, the investments, of course, those who were dependent in their liquidity on sales had a much more difficult time than those who were not dependent. With one exception, those who really solved the problem in the pandemic itself. They had a luxury problem, really having enough resources to serve all the demand. And I think that summarizes the great variety also of the pandemic had on startups and investors, I would say.
Yeah, maybe a few points. So I've switched now hats from, in doing small convertible note investments on the big company side and working with startups. But now, so I'll maybe start it off with, I saw a venture capitalist put something on LinkedIn saying, what not to do during the COVID times, what to do, to try to get the investment. And it's really, really hard to raise money. Always has been, generally speaking, right? But it's even harder now. And I actually commented on there, it's even harder to raise revenues, right? Yeah. And because obviously especially if you're a B2B business or a consumer, right? I mean, all the pockets are much smaller. So I think my first kind of comment is we will see a lot of startups fall apart, especially if they didn't have cash on hand. We will see, you know, when it applies to specifically digital health, I'm sorry to say, but how many patient-physician communication platforms does a society need, right? We'll see, and no offense to any of them, there are some great ones out there and great entrepreneurs, but I think we'll see some level of consolidation and companies that will just falter to the side, ran out of cash. You know, I think on the purely startup side, so we've honestly been lucky. We started the process sometime in December, actually, early January. We were able to do our first close in May for probably about 80% of the round. We, to be fair, we did have tailwinds of the health coaching industry. I mean, if you think about COVID brought to this, you know, front and center, you know, comorbidities, prevention, wellness, you know, all of those topics that we as preachers of digital health have been talking about for years, now they're front and center again. And we had an aspect of telecoaching, and so a lot of the tailwinds. So you know, it's not like we foresaw that, but we were lucky enough to do that. And then the last thing that I will say, obviously, and I think you mentioned, Irene, it depends on the stage you're in. So the money that we raised, the original full round, we were going to make that last about 14 to 18 months. We kind of said, look, we'd rather actually save about 7% of the company because we can sharpen our pencils, because we can get great talent right now. And we're making the initial first close of the cash that we got probably going to last us 14 months. So my point is, you know, sharpen your pencils, entrepreneurs. It is difficult, but I think if you are able to continuously de-risk and show that, that's the, and by the way, if you don't need to take money, don't take it.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's absolutely true, Eugene, and I relate to most of these points. I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and VCs here, and as you said, there's lots of opinions and lots of differences based on stage and so on. But I think some of the things that struck to me is I've seen some investors say, you know, it's business as usual. I think it's an overstatement. I don't think it is business as usual. I think like everything else in life, we will need to understand what that means to us. Doesn't mean that people will not invest. Of course, people are making investments, but I think the approach is very different. One thing that, again, slightly debatable topic. I've seen many startups, and we saw actually one example here today, which is diagnostic robotics. I mean, they're not fundraising now; they're well funded, but they are doing something amazing and incredibly powerful for the medical field way before COVID-19. Now, what happens is with COVID-19, not only they got an accelerator, but they also got an opportunity to not completely pivot, but to actually make sure the direction is kind of going with the flow. And I still think they have a very long-term business, regardless of COVID-19 or not. But it's also a matter of adjusting a little bit the priorities and you know, the limited resources you have in a startup to capitalize on the opportunities right now. So it's not being opportunistic to the point of just creating, you know, particular messages around COVID and you know, a lot of outbound email, things that actually don't make any sense, but it's really taking the asset that you have that is a long-term asset, and regardless of the pandemic, and making sure that you really use all the leverage that you have right now to optimize kind of the vectors and align with investors. I think that's kind of my own takeaway.
Yeah, and I think the filter is can the business almost, you know, with all the pivots, I put it in quotes, for COVID-19, you know, at some point as a society we'll persevere, right? And there may be a vaccine in 2 years or 3 or 12 months or 6, we don't know. But, you know, is the business sustainable with or without COVID, right? I mean, you shouldn't rely on one side on COVID to, especially in the healthcare field, as a revenue source, right?
Yeah, hopefully it's over at some point. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to do hugs and shakes. So
exactly.
Till the next fun stuff pops in. Yeah, it's the startup world. Anyways, I wanted to switch gears to another topic, and Eugene, you know, we chatted about it in a while back. I've spent time with VCs now, and the reality is whether they are being outspoken about it or not. I mean, the majority of them, although they are still making investments, they switch their own time allocation to spend somewhere, I would say, around 70% of their time actually managing the current portfolio, like really making sure that their companies are going to be okay. And I would say, again, this is something we should be doing as investors at any point in time, of course, but I think right now it became a really critical and urgent matter. That tied it with the fact that, of course, they are a bit slower in making new investments. So with that in mind, I wanted to hear from you. Again, there is a lot of knowledge, information, a lot of startups use people from like ourselves that have been in the industry for a while, they've been in multinational firms that also have been entrepreneurs or investors to guide them somehow as a mentor, a coach, an advisor board member. There's lots of different roles, chairman, and so on. I wanted to hear your thoughts in terms of, I know you probably received several of those invitations. Like, what are the best ways that someone with a more industry background, global background, can actually be useful and help those startups realizing, the moment that we are, the resources they have, and the challenge they're going through?
Yeah. So if I understood the question, so obviously taking off, when I was at the large pharma co, my job in a way was to be out there, and we wanted to work with the best entrepreneurs in the world. And so kind of these serendipity discussions, and I was not on, maybe one or two advisory boards. So here's my feeling, and whether I'm wearing the corporate hat or entrepreneur hat with some background and experience. It needs to be quote unquote natural, right? Like, you want to be able to genuinely help that company set of entrepreneurs, that particular individual, right? It's not about just getting, on the advisory board of 27 different companies. That's absolutely freaking useless on you as a person, but it also, more importantly, becomes very useless for that startup that you're on, right? And my comment actually is to the startups is, don't just get somebody just for their name. You want to fill either the board itself with the investors and the advisory board with people that you're personally missing those skills, connectivity, gaps. And so it's funny because Marina and I, my wife, we were talking about, some of the angel investors that are part of our team. And Marina kind of looks at me and says, like, so wait a minute. Angels give us money to basically do quote unquote work for us and propagate for us. Like, yes, right? I mean, it's a unique
privilege.
So to answer your question very directly, I think we all have experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. We learn from them. I think it needs to be a natural fit on the advisory. And my comment always, honestly, there's no such thing as free lunch, right? I remember when I first posted that I'm leaving Bayer, I don't even know how many startups reached out, please join the advisory board. And my comment is, I need to focus. So I'm, 200% focused on your coach with Marina. And I'm doing a very few advisory boards, and these are non-operational in nature. This is where I can truly leverage, my skills, my knowledge, etc. And you got to stop it at that, right? When you feel that comfort level. Sorry, I could talk about this for hours.
Yep, fully agree. Well, we could go for a long time, and I'm not sure we have that much time left. I wanted to leave one final question, and then maybe we can make some closing remarks. And that's, it's surround ecosystems. I think the first thing I learned, back in the days when I started to work with the Microsoft Accelerators team, and we built the first one here in Israel, and decided to build in other geographies. It struck to me that people really overuse the term ecosystem. I'm plugged into the ecosystem, at that point in time, I was too much into my corporate life, and I was thinking, what's this ecosystem? I mean, what's the actual value? Is it just pure networking? I mean, what are you talking about? And I think I have a different perspective right now, but my point is, I was recently interviewed by actually a master's degree student out of Vienna, actually, and she somehow found me and interviewed me and asked me about differences between the ecosystem in Israel and Austria. And I said, I'm really not qualified to talk about ecosystem in Austria. I can tell you about Israel, Brazil, US, different cities, of course. But, I think the question is back to you. I think, Eugene, you've lived in Germany, you've lived in US and many different places. And Irene, I know you have also a very diverse background. What do you really think, when you think about as an entrepreneur, this connection with the ecosystem. I mean, what do you really see in terms of values? What do you give back to the ecosystem? What do you expect to get out of it in very concrete manners? I mean, what's the best way to really make sure you leverage the innovation ecosystem?
I'll be brief because I want to, Irene is at the hub of a lot of the stuff in Vienna. So, but I'll give you a very short version of it. People work with people, and I think in the ecosystem are like-minded individuals with some resources behind them or to the side of them, that if you merge some of these resources, and not literally merge, but kind of the cooperation is the new competition. That to me is the bottom line. I do see quite a lot of siloing. I mean, I remember when I was living in Netherlands, in Amsterdam. So in the north, there was the north and then the South Holland, and there were like efforts going on. And that's for a small country like Netherlands. So I think it also takes individuals, again, people work with people, to try to really pull some of these things together a bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Eugene. It's a very good description. I would like to add, I think it comes back to the why, is the driving forces. Usually, if the why of another person resonates with you, you generate trust. And that trust is really the glue in an ecosystem. If only two people trust each other, they won't get as far as if there is 100 of people who trust each other. And if it's just, via the one trusts the other, the trust the next. But the ecosystem works better and better if really everybody trusts everybody. I mean, that's very, it's a very hard goal to really reach. But the more trust you have between the more diverse people, that's a very resilient ecosystem. And it goes, the entrepreneurs, the universities, the young talent, the old talent, the industry people, the legal advice, the investors on every level. They're strategic investors and business angels, etc., etc. And the more trust you find in an ecosystem, and the more diversity and the more interconnected a single ecosystem with other ecosystems. So the more trust Eugene took from one place to the other, basically that's what makes us faster. And no one of us, I always say I'm an expert in pretty much nothing. Because I have a broad spectrum to serve, and I do see a lot of different things, and I talk to entrepreneurs, to investors, to universities. So but that we need those people too. We need experts, and everything in between you need. And I think that's really the driving force of an ecosystem. And it's hard if you start kind of disconnected, for instance, as a big global corporate player, but you have to start at some point, and you enter an ecosystem. You have to build your trust also. I think that's a big problem of corporates, that they're in the eyes of many entrepreneurs, probably they're not trustworthy at first sight. But you have to work on the trust and gain that trust and build further. And the more people also move from one side to the other, the better it is, because you take this trust with you. The person is always, the talent is always the node of trust that moves from one side to the other, from the next into the next ecosystem. And I think that's really people is the driving force that are trustworthy.
Yeah, and on the note, I think we'll probably need to wrap up soon, but as long as Thomas doesn't cut it off, I think we all have been fun here, but we'll stop soon. I wanted to, ask a question. I'm just looking at some of the comments here, and, there's a lot of comments around the too much corporate talk and etc. It's interesting because, talking to entrepreneurs, there is this kind of feeling that I got to be an entrepreneur because corporations are too slow and too bureaucratic to innovate. But on the other hand, although they do bring also some innovation, even if you think that's not the case, at the end of the day, most B2B startups will eventually need to sell into those corporations. So they will need to drive innovation into those corporations, whether they want it or not. And I think that's, you know, in my experience, I help a lot of organizations to bring, for example, Israeli technologies down to some corporations in Brazil as an example. And, you know, the one observation I have is, you know, there is something that's, in my opinion, is becoming more commoditized, which is, you know, finding a great startup or a great solution. I mean, there's tons of them. We have here in INSA, for example, Startup Nation Central, which is an organization that helps you find those. So I think this technology scouting thing with technology is becoming a lot easier to discover those great startups. The real bottleneck, in my experience, has been, okay, once you do that, how do you make those entrepreneurs work with those corporations and generate results? And that's, you know, probably a very long and big question. But I think, given your experiences, what kind of, you know, suggestions or tips you have for entrepreneurs when they actually need to go down and not just close a sale, but make sure they do have an impact in those corporations?
So maybe I'll start, because if you remember in the last question, I started with people work with people, and we're very quick to kind of say, well, a corporation or a company or a logo. At the end of the day, you as an entrepreneur need a champion, right? Somebody that will believes in you as an entrepreneur and your team, somebody who believes in your vision, and more importantly, has a need for what you're doing, right? And finding that match and working with that champion. Now, the challenge in large organizations is there's, like, you know, musical chairs, generally speaking, right? So, you know, are you able, and is that champion able to really move you along? So I think the short version, in my opinion, no large corporation has really figured out how do you, I always kind of said, I actually have no issues finding startups. My challenge was always, how do you land it inside the organization? Yep. And the only way to do that is work through champions, right? That's kind of the short version.
Yeah. Well, my answer to that also is it always depends. And first, the startup has varying interest in working with corporates. Yeah? Some are looking for resources, some are looking for sales capacity, some are looking for production capacity, some are looking for investments. Yeah? And that needs to fit with what the corporate wants to do. Because if one is looking for investment and the other is looking for a startup to co-develop something, it just simply won't work. So that fit of interest needs to be met. Yeah, you just need to take care of not talking not only to the wrong person, but also not only to the wrong corporate itself. Because if their interest is somewhere completely else, yeah, yep. No matter what you do, you will not gain them as a partner. And the other issue is really that as I said before, a startup, that's something they can do very, very well. That's usually one dimension in the development of a business. Yeah, that's developing a new technology. This is something that corporates usually cannot do, or not at least that well. Yeah, they. Radical innovation is never being developed in a corporate, never, ever. You know, you see that in many. It's because they have so many strings attached, and they have both economically as well as on the talent side. So this is what the startup can do better than the corporate. Yet the corporate can do other things better, and that is, for instance, production. And I think it comes back to what I initially said. Yeah, the startup should focus on what they can do best and buy in everything else. And if it's corporate, it should be a corporate. If it's, you are never ever as fast to build up a production site that meets all the, in particular in healthcare, it's such a complicated thing. Yeah, you're never ever able to build up the customer base in hospitals, for instance, to sell to. Yeah, they have it already. So I think it's really the entrepreneur's obligation is to again find out what are we really good at, what can we do best, and thus the fastest. And everything else, you look for somebody else. And in some places, you will be corporates. In other places, you will be VC if it comes to investment. Sometimes as a board member, you have to bring in expertise. So I think that's it. And if it, it always has to fit both sides. You cannot marry another person who doesn't, want you. It always has to be both sides. They both have to have the benefit of that partnership.
Great, thank you. And I see Thomas is back. I assume we are out of time. Is that right?
He's getting nervous.
I would love to take this conversation all day long, honestly. But we do have to finalize and wrap up our next couple of sessions as well. Any final remarks, Beny, that you would like before I?
Yeah, I first I wanted to thank everyone. I think when I suggested this topic, not only I'm very passionate and everybody here is passionate, but I think again it's super important. We all talk about innovation, and yes, there are many things that come from startups. I would say actually a lot of great innovation came from large multinationals, IBM Research, Microsoft Research, Yahoo Research, all these companies, whether they are doing great or not today, they are, Intel, they generated a lot of innovation as well. And so first thing, I think it's super important that we appreciate that as part of the ecosystem, there are multiple players, and we may like or dislike certain kinds of patterns of behaviors, but as part of human beings and looking at our own development, I think we need to get the best out of every player. It is possible, somebody asked here, to be a startup and only look at corporations as customers. Absolutely perfectly fine. I would say in some cases it's a great strategy. In some cases you're probably missing something as well. But my only takeaway, I think, there's lots and lots of great points raised here, is that if we think about it, I used to think that an entrepreneur is necessarily somebody who works in a startup, but as we all can attest, there are entrepreneurs everywhere. And I think what COVID-19 did to all of us, outside of the the health issues, of course, is that it forced all of us to become entrepreneurs. And I chose to leave Microsoft to become an entrepreneur, even though I consider myself an entrepreneur before. And in reality, is whether you're working in a VC, which in my experience is not the most innovative model. It's actually a very standard way of operating. They also been disrupted. The startups themselves were disrupted. The corporations were disrupted. Everyone was, the healthcare system is disrupted. And so I think that, in a way, it's whether you like or dislike it, it's a great stimulus. It's a great, although people are, certainly constrained physically, I think it's, for me personally, it actually triggered a lot of curiosity, a lot of new connections, a lot of new ideas, and a lot of new ways to do work. So I think it's there's a lot of positives in that, and I think we should all become more entrepreneurs, no matter where we sit in an organization now.
What it definitely did, may I add something? What it definitely did, it opened some doors that were firmly closed before. In many places, and I think people we just had to enforce telemedicine in places where telemedicine was not used before due to hundreds of reasons, and digitization in general. We all realized we can do teleworking. It's not that bad, and I think and I think we really made a big leapfrog jump on that issue, and it opened many doors for innovation. And I think I think we should do, all of us, entrepreneurs, corporates, investors, do our best to keep those doors open.
Just look at the platform we're using, Hopin, right? Like they've literally raised, I think, $6 million when COVID hit, and scarcity breeds creativity, and the scarcity during the COVID-19 was physical touch. So here we are in waiting rooms and networking rooms, and Zoom is a term that a 3-year-old now knows, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Certainly mine does, and is having some classes there. Great. I want to thank again everyone. Thank you also, Thomas, for hosting us. Apologies for the technical challenges, but I think we sorted them out. And we are around. Happy to answer any other questions in the rooms or outside of this environment as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
On behalf
Stay
of,
safe and sane. Cheers.
Hope to see you all in Bratislava in October.
right. Just to pick up on what Beny's saying, thank you, Eugene, Irene, and Beny. We met last year at the Future of Health Summit, and we were supposed to meet this year as well. And we hopefully will be meeting in October between the 18th and 19th and 20th of October. So looking forward, and thank you once again. I sincerely appreciate your time and this discussion that we had over here.
Ciao. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.